We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked.
And complete the dang fence.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill.
Cast down your bucket where you are.
We come from France.
And I am, adamantly against illegal immigrants.
They're coming in by the thousands, just unbelievable.
A wall is an immorality.
Who are you rooting for?
Those masters of the universe are at it again.
They're not sending their best.
You maniac! You blew it up!
Welcome to Parsing Immigration Policy, the podcast of the Center for Immigration Studies. My name is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center. And today we're going to talk about something that is very important in the immigration enforcement area, but doesn't get as much focus as it should and isn't understood as well as it should be. And that is the issue of detention, immigration detention. This is not keeping people in jail or prison for committing a crime. This is civil detention, holding on to people until they can be removed. And so it's, even though it's the same kind of thing, I mean, you're in a building and the doors are locked, it's very fundamentally a different thing. And we have with us Andrew Arthur on our staff, who not only knows a lot about this in theory, but also was for many years an immigration judge in a detention center for illegal aliens. So this is something he has direct firsthand experience with, as well as the broader policy familiarity. So Art, thanks for coming in. And if you could tell us first, just what is detention? Why does it matter?
The first point that you made is absolutely crucial. This isn't punitive incarceration. This isn't punitive detention. Immigration detention exists solely for ministerial purposes, to ensure that aliens show up for their hearings, and if they are ordered removed, that they will be available to ICE to physically deport from the United States. As we know, the likelihood that an alien is going to be removed from the United States is exponentially higher by a factor of 9 if the alien is actually in detention, as opposed to not being in detention. Just
out on the street where ICE would have to find them.
Yeah, just about a third, 34%, according to the Government Accountability Office, of all aliens who are supposed to show up in immigration court don't appear at some point in that process and are ordered removed in absentia. And the form that is issued by ICE to tell a non-detained alien that they're supposed to appear for physical deportation is informally called a bag and baggage letter, because it tells you that you can bring 40 pounds of bags or baggage with you, but is even more informally known as a run letter, because it basically tells the alien that ICE is actually in the process of removing them. So yeah, in the immigration context, detention is absolutely crucial. And in fact, it's so crucial that at a number of places in the Immigration and Nationality Act, Congress has directed DHS to physically detain aliens, primarily criminals. And we can go through those very quickly. The first detention mandate is in Section 235B of the INA, and that is for aliens who are apprehended entering the United States illegally and for aliens who are deemed inadmissible at the ports of entry. The Trump administration recently changed the interpretation of that provision to say that any alien who entered the United States illegally is subject to mandatory detention, that immigration judges do not have the authority to issue bonds with them. Done a number of interviews in the past 10 days discussing the parameters of that. And honestly, it is the proper interpretation of that Section 235B. Immigration judges don't have authority to set bonds for anybody who entered the United States illegally. The statute is pretty clear. The only problem is that for the past 29 years, various administrations have said, well, that's what the law says, but judges can still grant you a bond anyway. Now, the administration is, doing what Congress said, to take those people into custody. The other two big categories of aliens who are subject to mandatory detention are other criminal aliens. So if you were lawfully admitted to the United States, and you committed a crime that makes you deportable, you're supposed to be detained. There's a little bit more leeway as it relates to, minor drug crimes for lawfully admitted aliens.
And so that would be detention after they serve whatever sentence, if they do serve a criminal sentence at the local or state level.
Right. And in fact, the law is clear that ICE must take those individuals into custody immediately after they're released from that period of incarceration. And for a while, reviewing courts were like, well, if you don't get them right away, then you can't take them into custody at all. Eventually, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, yeah, no, that's not actually how that goes. As soon as they can get their hands on them, they're supposed to be detained. The other major category is aliens who are under final orders of removal on criminal grounds. All aliens under final.
So even if they're not illegal aliens, but if they've been ordered removed on criminal grounds.
If they've been ordered removed from the United States, technically ICE is supposed to take them immediately into custody and hold them for at least 90 days, which is known as the removal period. Congress's thought was it's not going to take more than 90 days to remove anybody from the United States.
Quaint.
Yes, and you're laughing for good reason. But with respect to criminal aliens, Congress doubles down and says in no circumstance may you release anybody who was ordered removed on criminal grounds.
Interesting.
So, those are the three major requirements for mandatory detention in the INA. Technically, every 6 months, the Secretary of Homeland Security is supposed to send a report to the committees of jurisdiction, to the House Judiciary Committee and to the Senate Judiciary Committee, telling them how much money the Secretary is going to need in the next 6 months to comply with all of those detention standards.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, that report's never been sent, but it certainly wasn't sent under the Biden administration. I anticipate that Secretary Noem will actually send that letter, and it's probably going to be a pretty big number.
And related to the issue of cost, one of the central elements of the big, beautiful bill, the reconciliation bill that Congress passed and the president signed recently, was extra money for detention, precisely because it is a bottleneck in the enforcement agenda of the administration. In other words, ICE can arrest all the people it wants, but if it has nowhere to hold people, it ends up just letting them go and then having to, apprehend them again or something like that. So what are we likely to see with the infusion of the significant extra infusion of money into detention?
Yeah, so the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the OBBA, provides funding for 80,000 new ICE beds. And this is important for a reason. At the end of the first Trump administration, DHS was they had detention space for about 55,000 people. Now, because of COVID restrictions, they weren't actually holding that many people because various courts stepped in and said, you have to let these people out because it's a COVID concern. We don't want anybody to die in custody.
Just to be clear, the number is like the daily number. So, in other words, it would be overall in a whole year, it would be many more people than that. That's like the snapshot number.
Exactly. So if you have one daily detention bed and that bed is occupied for an average of 30 days, then, that's really, 12 beds, but one individual bed
with
over
12,
a 1 year period.
12 aliens.
12 aliens.
Over the period of the
year. Much better way to put it. Thank you. You are the best editor.
What can I say?
But yeah, so we do it based on a daily detention bed. Each daily detention bed is about $150 per day, and that provides everything, housing, food, clothing, education, if people needed pastoral care, medical care, dental care, psychological care.
Right.
If the alien needs it. And if you think about it, immigration is a federal responsibility. One of the things that the Biden administration did was, one, it didn't fill those 55,000 beds. It constantly went back to Congress and said we can get by with a much smaller number, about 27,000 daily beds, which, was fairly ludicrous given the fact that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were showing up at the border every month.
Right.
Each of whom should have been detained. In December 2021, the Biden administration actually just stopped using the family housing that it had. Again, under the Flores settlement agreement, ICE can only hold family units for parents and children for 20 days. The Biden administration in December 2021 just decided it wasn't going to,
not even the 20 days, in other words. Yeah.
So, and there were two major facilities, one in Karnes, Texas, and one in Dilley, Texas, that are specifically meant for family housing. I've had the opportunity to view the one in Karnes, Texas, and, it has everything that they need. It has a medical clinic, a dental clinic, school rooms for the children, playing fields so that the kids can, go outside and play.
And there was one, which I think is closed now, in York that was like contracted out.
Yeah, that was
I've
the
actually
Burks.
Visited that one.
Yeah, that was the Burks Family Shelter up near Reading, Pennsylvania, which was on an old assisted living facility, but it looked like a college campus. It looked like a small college campus, 24/7 snacks for the kids and everything. Biden administration decided that was too much. It stopped utilizing that facility, and it went down. It cut out family housing eventually in December 2021. So the Trump administration basically came into office with a hollowed out detention system.
Right.
A lot of the places like my old prison, York County Prison, where I was a judge in York, Pennsylvania, had gotten out of its contract with the federal government because the Biden administration kept imposing more and more onerous requirements on it.
Just to be clear, so people understand, detention could be an ICE-owned facility, or it could be a local facility that ICE has a contract with. I've been to some of those, like in northern Alabama. I think it was a county jail where they have two separate sections, one for regular prisoners, one for ICE detainees, or it could be a private company that ICE contracts with.
Yeah, Geo and Core Civic both run private immigration detention facilities. And in the case of county jails like, the York County Prison, it was actually a bonus for the community because the facility was big enough to hold a large number of criminals, but they very rarely had that many. And so the county would recoup the money from that by opening portions of the facility for immigration detainees. Now, again, they were held under a lower standard than the criminal detainees were because they're not, they're not identified as criminals. They are identified as civil detainees.
One interesting point on that I noticed when I visited one of these in Alabama was I remember asking the warden or whatever the director was called whether his officers started out in the ICE facility and then the more experienced ones were moved to the county regular jail. And he said it was actually the actual opposite because the ICE standards were much higher. So he actually only essentially promoted people who were in the county, the guards who were in the regular county jail. The ones who were worth promoting and were more responsible were the only ones that he assigned to the ICE facility because the standards were so much higher.
Yeah, and that's an absolutely crucial point because ICE follows what are called the performance-based national detention standards. These are national standards that are set that certain facilities comply with, but any facility that contracts out to ICE has to comply with what we call the PBNDS. And it really is the gold standard. It's the highest standard of care at these facilities. And, there's been a lot of talk that, some of these facilities are not allowing detainees to get sleep or the food is bad or whatever. It's important to note, every member of Congress can walk into any immigration detention facility anytime he or she wants. There are at least 5 committees of jurisdiction on Capitol Hill that have jurisdiction over all of these facilities. Mm-hmm. In addition, DHS OIG has jurisdiction to ensure that all of these facilities meet the standards and that everything is appropriate. Finally, you've got the Government Accountability Office that could ultimately do this. Right. So when you hear all these, horror stories, it's important to keep in mind, there's probably no more oversight in the federal government over any particular issue than there is over immigration detention. And again, if a member of Congress wants to walk in at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday morning to see what's going on, they have to let them in. And I could guarantee you, if they don't like immigration enforcement, they're going to be, rushing to find the first camera to tell them all the horrors they've seen.
As is their want.
Want, as one does.
So a couple of points, a couple of questions on detention. I remember I've been in detention facility. It was in a foreign country at the border. And they insisted it wasn't detention because they could leave anytime they wanted. They just had to go back across the border. So in a sense, isn't that similar here, at least for many detainees? Because at least the non-criminal ones, maybe even all of them, they can leave anytime they want if they give up pursuing their cases to try to stay in the United States.
Yes, and in fact, in 2020, in a case called DHS versus Thurasigium that had to do with the detention of somebody who was apprehended crossing the border immediately, that person had filed a habeas suit. The whole idea behind a habeas suit is that you get released from custody.
Right.
And Justice Alito noted, I wish I had the exact words that he used, was they're free to leave the facility anytime they want on the inside of an airliner.
Right.
But they're not going to be able to be released into the American community.
Right.
It's an absolutely crucial point.
So one of the reasons people are detained, obviously, as you suggested, the point is to make sure that if they have a negative finding one way or the other, they actually are there and you can remove them. Even if they agree, though, it does still take some time to do travel documents. In other words, and so this is something that people don't think about the other end of it. In other words, you can't just land in a country. We can't just send airplanes to any country we want. I mean, I guess if we're going to bomb them, we can. But I mean, in a non-hostile sense, you can't just land somewhere and throw people at the back of an airplane. A country needs to issue whatever travel documents are required. And first of all, what's that process? And secondly, there are countries that won't take their people back. And so what do we do about those folks?
So with respect to, major sending countries, as we refer to them, the Northern Triangle countries of Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and Mexico, that can be a very short process. Certainly in the case of Mexico, if it's somebody at the border, we could turn them around in a number of hours. But even at the York County Prison, which is, sort of a remote facility, about an hour and a half north of Baltimore, about 2 hours from Philly and Pittsburgh, respectively, we would have consular officers from those Central American countries that would come through regularly, that would issue travel documents to their nationals, because again, it's in the interest of a foreign country to get its national out of an immigration detention facility as quickly as possible. So they're generally pretty amenable to that. But with respect to the other countries that you're talking about that won't take back their nationals or that slow walk the paperwork, we refer to those as recalcitrant countries. It's the term that we use. A couple of different things. One, if the DHS secretary tells the Secretary of State that some country won't take back one of its nationals, the Secretary of State is under an obligation to restrict visa issuance in that country. Sort of, we're not going to give you any visas if you're not going to take your people back.
Right.
We've actually seen the Trump administration use that both in Trump 1 and in Trump 2. Another thing that we can do, though, is to use tariff threats or other economic threats to get them to take back their nationals. We saw this happen in the case of India, even before Trump took office. India and Venezuela were both very amenable to taking back certain of their nationals, fearing that Trump was going to drop the tariff hammer on them.
They became amenable to it.
They became amenable. And then the third thing is third country removals. If we could find a country that will take an alien who is under a final order of removal, DHS can, in fact, send them. This has been the subject of some litigation because the Trump administration has ramped up that policy. Right. But by and large, the Supreme Court has allowed those removals to go forward. In the case of Tren de Aragua members or suspected Tren de Aragua members, the Trump administration has sent Venezuelans who were in TDA to El Salvador. And we recently found out that El Salvador has then repatriated them to Venezuela. We don't have very good diplomatic relations with Venezuela, so it's a lot easier to go through a third country, remove them to that country. We've also seen removals to South Sudan and some other countries, including Eswatini.
Which is Swaziland is the actual name for that. But the one thing, the last point on this is that if those various strategies don't work, we shut off visas, we make tariff threats or other kinds of, because there's other diplomatic means we could use to pressure somebody, and we can't find a third country to take somebody, we can't detain them indefinitely, right? In other words, there is a limit. The the Supreme Court has said, right? Is there a limit to how long you can detain somebody if there's no immediate prospect of they're being sent somewhere else?
Yeah, if there's no reasonable possibility of removal within a 6-month period, generally ICE must release those individuals. But there is an important exception to that. In the case of an alien who is especially dangerous, that we cannot remove and that we can't release safely, what Jefferson called holding a wolf by the jaws, then ICE would make a determination that the person was specially dangerous. That then goes through a review process. In fact, I heard one of these cases when I was an immigration judge, and that person was specially dangerous, that to detain them indefinitely. But that really is the exception to the rule. In the case you're talking about was Zadvadas versus Davis. It's a 2000 case from the Supreme Court, because technically under the INA, they can hold those people forever. And a large number of Mariel Cubans, in fact, were detained indefinitely up until the Zadvadas case came down.
Interesting. So the money from the big, beautiful bill, I guess, is starting to flow. I mean, the bill is passed. But even in the most optimistic scenario, it'll still take a while to to let contracts to companies or to county jails or whatever it is. And in the meantime, the administration has announced it's using a couple of military bases to put up what they call soft-sided facilities. It's basically like a glorified tent facilities with electricity and water and all that sort of thing in military bases in New Jersey and Indiana. And this has got a lot of, at least it's sort of got the usual suspects in a lather about this. And yet, using military facilities for immigration detention is not some unknown thing, right? It was done in the past as well.
In fact, it was done all the way back to the Carter administration when Mariel Cubans were detained at Guantanamo base in Cuba, and then at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, and a couple of other locations around the United States. And, that continued into the Reagan administration. But the most notable recent examples of this were under the Obama administration, when we received a large number of unaccompanied alien children and of women showing up with children in family units. The Obama administration actually placed some of those folks at Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I think it was Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and also at Naval Base Ventura County in California. Again, got some pushback about that in real time, but nothing like what you're hearing directed toward the Trump administration with respect to this proposal. Again, it's important to note that the military has excess space that it can use. It's not going to impact military operations because it is excess. We're not moving any of our troops out of barracks and into tents so that they can go there. And those facilities generally have a commissary, a PX, they have a medical bay, a hospital, and they have dining halls where those individuals can be accommodated.
Right. And the military has the capacity to quickly set up these kind of facilities too. I mean, in other words, if they've got even if they don't have the building, if they've got the space for it, they're well equipped to set up what they call these soft-sided facilities.
Yeah, one of the benefits of American military operations abroad is that it's given our military the capacity to, in a matter of days, set up small cities to accommodate troops. We can, and, as part of our force readiness, it's important that they, keep that muscle memory. We're not engaged in the same kind of military activities we were a decade or more ago. And so the capacity of the military to actually engage in those exercises is a positive thing.
Yeah, so in a sense, it's actually a readiness benefit because it keeps them in practice for the kind, they're not shooting anybody. That's a different kind of readiness, but the kind of thing is sort of a logistical, it keeps them on their logistics game in a sense.
Yeah.
And as how does the saying go? It's like amateurs think about strategy, professionals think about tactics, but people who really know what they're doing think about logistics.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the great examples of World War II where it was our logistical ability. Warner Robins was the namesake of the town in Georgia, was actually the logistician who, came up with the manual for preparing the Army Air Corps to fight, in foreign theaters. So, yeah, I mean, it's the great advantage that our military has, and there's no reason to let that, know-how go to rust. So, they are able to do it.
And the last thing I wanted to touch on, and this has got a lot of news, is Alligator Alcatraz, or as somebody likes to call it, what is it? Gator Gitmo is one nickname I've heard, which they're not using officially. But the point of this is that it's a state facility that's a detention facility. And so what role can states play in helping ICE with specifically this detention issue? I'm not even talking about the other things states can do, which is helping arrest illegals and all that sort of thing, but specifically in the detention area, what does Alligator Alcatraz represent?
So this is an effort of the state of Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis, my old boss, to utilize the authority
in the House when you
in
were
the House of Representatives. I've never worked for him as governor, but to use Section 287G of the INA, which allows for state and local cooperation in immigration enforcement. This is sort of the next step of that, because as you know, generally they identify, criminal aliens. They may detain criminal aliens for a period of time, but now they're actually engaged in a state effort, again, with federal funding, to expand their own detention capacity in order to accommodate individuals who I believe are going to be detained there for 14 days on average.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, this is a little bit different in the sense that it's not a pre-existing, say, county jail that's using its extra bed space. This is a devoted immigration detention facility, but one run by and set up by the state.
Yeah, absolutely, with reimbursement from the federal government.
Right. Interesting. Detention is a kind of bottleneck. And like you had said, that the Obama administration and then even more in the Biden administration hollowed out the ability to detain people. And they were saying it's more cost effective to do what they call alternatives to detention, which is a whole other show. Alternatives to detention are really alternatives to enforcing the law, the way of pretending that you're enforcing the law without actually doing it. So detention is a kind of bottleneck. If that bottleneck widens, as it were, because there's now more facilities, more bed space coming online, does that then translate to more arrests potentially? Because there's really no point to arresting people if you can't detain them.
Yeah, absolutely. And more crucially, it also leads to more final orders by immigration judge.
Okay.
So at the end of the Biden administration, they stopped publishing statistics on median detention times. But at the time that they stopped publishing them, I believe the median completion time for a detained case was 47 days. But as recently as FY 2008, it was 8 days. And, cases move a lot more quickly in a detained setting. When I was a judge, I could complete a case from beginning to end in anywhere between 3 weeks and, 6 weeks.
Because they're going to show up because the alien is 100 yards away in a detention facility.
Yep. And they have every incentive to complete their cases as quickly as possible. The judges have every incentive to complete them consistent with due process. But the real benefit of that is if somebody doesn't have any immigration relief, if they're removable, they can be more quickly ordered removed. If they do have immigration relief, if they are eligible for asylum, the immigration judge can grant that application much more quickly and allow that individual, that alien to get on with his life in the United States. And more importantly, for that alien to petition to bring relatives abroad who, might be in the same danger that the principal respondent was in. So, this benefits the cause of justice, if you would, because those people who, are deserving get their benefit quickly. Those people who aren't deserving get deported quickly.
Yeah, exactly. This really is an important issue, and it really is, I think, strategic on the part of the anti-enforcement crowd to attack immigration detention, because it's a kind of important, I don't know if pivot point is the right word, but it's an important area that if you can cripple it, if you can shrink it, if you can make it as difficult as possible, it becomes difficult to enforce immigration law in general. And
it's an A plus ultra in this situation. And it's interesting because a couple of states, California, New Jersey, and Maryland, most prominent amongst them, have attempted to limit the amount of detention space that they have or that ICE has in their state by, blocking county jails from entering into these contracts, by preventing private organizations from establishing private detention facilities. But at the end of the day, the only thing that does is it harms the aliens themselves. Because if your lawyer and your family is in Maryland, but ICE can't detain you anywhere in Maryland, they're not going to release you. They're going to send you to a place like Alligator, Alcatraz,
right,
that does have detention
or
space.
Louisiana, or
Texas.
In the case of a number of the people who were in the news, the
Mahmoud Khalil
in New York,
was,
and what's his name, Maryland man.
Kilmar Abrego
Right.
Garcia.
Right. So anyway, the point is, it's it doesn't release. It doesn't get anybody released. It just gets them detained somewhere even farther from their lawyers and their families. So, okay, good. Thanks, Art. I think there's plenty more to talk about in this detention area, but I just thought it was important to focus on it, like I said, because it's such a kind of critical nexus for immigration enforcement that people really don't think about. Think about ICE agents going out and arresting people, and that's important, obviously. Think about planes taking people back home. Again, very important. But detention is the thing that connects those two pieces of the immigration enforcement process that is very important, a kind of a hinge. I guess I'm looking for the metaphor. I'm not sure which is the right one, but it's really important and doesn't get the focus and the attention, I think, at least in the debate, that it really warrants.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the one big beautiful bill, that's probably the most crucial component for immigration enforcement. The bonuses for ICE officers are great. The money for more Border Patrol agents is good. But truly, if you don't have the detention space, you're not actually going to be able to run a credible immigration system.
Right. Good. Thanks. Thanks for coming in. And we will obviously have you on in the future. But for now, I think we're done here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And finally, a few thoughts about a piece of legislation which isn't going anywhere, but it's getting a lot of attention. It's called the Dignity Act, introduced primarily by Congresswoman Salazar from Florida. And it's basically, I like to call it Gang of Eight Redux. It seems that every 8 or 10 years, the pro-amnesty, increased immigration crowd makes a big push, a bipartisan push for more amnesty and more immigration. And that happened with the in the middle of the aughts, 2005, 6, and 7, with the Bush administration pushed an amnesty. It happened again in 2013, 14 with the Gang of Eight, working with President Obama's administration. And now we have the Dignity Act, which is, for those who want to look it up, H.R. 4393, which does basically the same thing as those bills did. It amnesties almost all the illegal population, increases legal immigration significantly, and while it does have some specific provisions that are, beneficial to enforcement, like E-Verify, it also handcuffs immigration enforcement in a number of ways. For instance, codifying the Biden administration policy that ICE was prohibited from doing anything in a whole bunch of locations, protected areas. Basically, it kind of creates a nationwide sanctuary system anywhere near a courthouse, a hospital, a school, any place where children might gather, any place providing social services. We've, in the past, mapped out small areas. I think we did something about Tucson, downtown Tucson, and under the protected area policies, there were like a few spots here and there where ICE was allowed to operate, but basically it prohibited them from doing anything almost anywhere. Codifies the Flores settlement agreement, which is something that makes it very difficult to enforce immigration law against illegal immigrants that bring children with them. So it's one of the things that the immigration activist groups and the immigration lawyers have been pushing for a long time is to not change the numerical caps, in this case on employment-based visas, but to apply them only to the applicant and exclude the family members from being counted in the numerical cap. So in a sense, basically doubling employment-based legal immigration. And it does all kinds of other things. There's the Immigration Accountability Project, iaproject.org online, has some fact sheets with sort of the lowlights, as it were, of the bill, and then a longer section-by-section breakdown. The center doesn't do lobbying on legislation, so this is something that the Immigration Accountability Project is more directly involved in. Definitely worth looking at. It's not going anywhere, obviously, but it is an important reminder, especially that because its lead sponsor is a Republican and has a significant number of Republican co-sponsors as well as Democrats. It's an important reminder that the pro-amnesty, pro-increased immigration crowd, basically the unlimited immigration crowd, never sleeps, never rests, and is always going to keep trying to push its agenda. And they're now rationalizing it by saying that the Trump administration has reduced illegal crossings at the border, so everything's fixed, and now we can amnesty all the illegals who are here. In fact, there's still a lot of work to do. This administration has only been in office for 6 months or so, and the idea that our past enforcement problems have been resolved, and now we don't have to worry about that, and we can move on to, amnestying the illegal population that's here and increasing immigration is frankly kind of preposterous. But like I said, it's the message that this de facto unlimited immigration crowd has been pushing for decades and always kind of waits for the next opportunity to push this agenda. So I would encourage people to learn more about it. We'll have links in the show notes to these fact sheets that IAP has put out, and learn more about it. And if you have opinions about it, make sure your representative hears what they are. In the meantime, thanks for tuning in. Thank you to our producer, Brian Griffith, for making all of this work and making sure the right cords are plugged into the right sockets. It's a lot more complicated than it looks. And if you like what you hear or even don't like what you hear, please rate and review us if your podcast platform permits that. And if you have any thoughts, positive, negative, neutral, ideas for future shows, please email us at center@cis.org. Until next week, this is Mark Krikorian.